It was only the cinematographer Thomas Mauch on the raft and me with a sound. And of course, 400 monkeys, and they were kind of afraid, and they would accumulate under a cannon. About 150 of them would pile up under the cannon, and I saw the camera approaching, and I stirred them up quickly, jumped aside, and the camera was panning there. And I was bitten at least 30 times during this shooting, and the cinematographer, Thomas Mauch, he had a monkey on his... He had his camera on that side. On the other side, a monkey was hanging onto his neck and bit him in the ear.
When one looks at the beginnings of most directors, they've often had something that's sent them indoors to look at cinema a lot when they're children. I mean, they've often had an illness or something that's made them alone watching films on television, or they would taken, by parents. But you did not. I mean, this is the extraordinary thing. You didn't really have a cinematic childhood at all.
I didn't have an illness either. But since I grew up in a very remote, the remotest of valleys in the Bavarian Alps, I did not see films. In fact, I had no idea that cinema existed until I was 11. And by coincidence, a traveling projectionist came to this little schoolhouse. There was one classroom, but for first, second, third, and fourth grade in one classroom. We were 25 or so children and had one teacher. So, and I saw films for the first time, and they were lousy and didn't impress me. So I grew up without all this. But I grew up as well without running water. We had to go to the well with a bucket and bring water into the house. And electricity, much of the time, not always. No telephones, no radio or anything. So it was a very beautiful and pleasant time.
So what was the moment what was the, as it were, the galvanic moment when you realized that cinema might be the medium in which you would want to work?
There was no galvanic moment per se. It somehow was quite clear to me that I would be a poet, or rather I would make films, but I knew I would make better films than what I saw when I moved to Munich at age 11 or 12. And there's maybe one moment I could, in fact, pinpoint at Dr. Fu Manchu. And my friends, we always took films for real, and we thought people who were shot dead were really dead. And in Dr. Fu Manchu, there was I think there were 20 or 30 Dr. Fu Manchu films, and one of his henchmen got shot from a rock and flies through the air and is dead. And something like 20 minutes later, another gun battle, and they recycled this 3-second shot with a guy flipping through the air. And I said to my friends that there was something wrong, and didn't you see that? No, they hadn't seen it. And they thought somebody who was shot dead could not reappear and be shot dead again. And I started to look at cinema slightly differently. How do they put it together? How do they create suspense? How do they... So I had some sort of a different perspective. But that's the only thing that I can somehow name. Otherwise, it was quite clear I would make films. The real question was, would I shoulder it? I knew it was going to be a difficult life. It dawned on me very early, and would I accept my destiny or not? So it became clear, yes.
Because you founded your own production company at 21, I think, which suggests, tremendous confidence in your ability to be able to do.
Yes, confidence, but at the same time it was a necessity, because nobody would produce the films I had in mind. So while I was still in school, and it started much earlier, 16, 17, 18, While I was in school during night, I worked a night shift as a welder in a steel factory and earned money for the moment I finished school, I started to produce, and I had the money for film production.
And were you always interested right from the beginning in if you like, people who were visionaries or adventurers or something that went beyond the everyday?
Well, I was always fascinated by those who were ahead of their time. For example, the pharaoh Akhenaton was very fascinating for me. He was 1,000 years ahead of his time. Or a musician like a composer like Gesualdo, who in Monteverdi's time created music that we had heard only later on when Stravinsky burst onto the scene, or artists like Hercules Segers, early Rembrandt time, who made images, mostly landscapes, completely abstract and very, very strange, staged landscapes. And only in the 20th century we started to see something that was created by Hercules Segers 400 years earlier. And it ended in a way in an installation I did for the Biennale at the Whitney Museum, and it's called Hearsay of the Soul. It was partly music, partly images, installation of various screens and music.
So, the idea of the visionary, the people who are ahead of their time, brings us, in a sense, to the film that is to be released here at the end of this month, which has just had its premiere, Lo and Behold. And that very much has the idea of what the internet, how the internet came about, but also what the internet may deliver for us. And you're fascinated by people who, both the people who had the foresight going back, but also those who are even now considering where we might be going next.
Yes, of course, I'm fascinated by what's going on, but the strange thing here is, lo and behold, even the pioneers had no clue that they were triggering an avalanche of monumental proportions. They had no idea that this was momentous. And you see in the film, in the opening sequence, scientist and electrical engineer Leonard Kleinrock, who actually did the very first internet or connection between UCLA and Stanford University. And they only managed to get 2 letters across instead of log in. They typed in L and O, and when they typed in the G, the computer crashed. So that's how the title Lo and Behold. But they had no clue that this was big, they were doing. And there's only a very thin little logbook entry, and that's that. 20 years, 15 or 20 years later, it dawned on them, and they reconstructed the room where the message was sent out. And they put the old massive computer back into it, and they had to find the furniture, which was somewhere in storage in a basement. And they restored the room to make it into some sort of a shrine, meaning that it dawned on them 20 years later that they had done something of monumental importance.
And that, in a sense, is the pattern for shrines all the way through history, isn't it? That we kind of reconstruct them again. We're going to see that clip, if we could see that now, and where we're actually going to see Leonard Kleinrock himself, and you follow him into. So is this the room that we're about to see?
That's actually the room, yes, in one of those science buildings. And I, in my commentary, I don't know whether the clip contains it. Before he enters, I'm saying with my commentary and in my own voice, in one of the science buildings, in one of those repulsive-looking corridors. You would never hear that on National Geographic.
You would never.
So, and I have no problem to do such a thing. and it's good that I'm kind of jolting the audience right away. And I do wild things once in a while that you cannot do on television or in National Geographic. For example, in the other film that I am releasing as well, Into the Inferno, about volcanoes, I'm speaking towards the end about the magma under us, under the crust of the continents and under the seabeds, and it's monumentally indifferent to scurrying roaches, retarded reptiles, and vapid humans alike. So you do not hear that normally when you watch television or when you watch National Geographic.
So could we see the clip from Lo and Behold, please?
And it's a beginning of the film.
The very beginning of the film. Why did you think the corridor was repulsive?
It looks repulsive to me. I mean, it's you just don't want to live there, for example. It looks like either a hospital or a prison yard, a corridor in a prison. I have seen a corridor like that in Vacaville prison for the the criminally insane. It's the same sort of corridors.
It doesn't look as though the future of humanity is going to lie in one of those doors off it, does it?
No, you don't expect that something of that importance happened there.
While they wind the clip up, I mean, you look at different aspects of the internet in the film. Did you find that any prejudices or preconceptions that you might have had beforehand were overtaken?
No, I don't have prejudices when I make a film. I'm curious. That's my basic attitude.
But there is running through that film that constant idea of the adventurers. I mean, there's a lovely little section with Elon Musk when he's talking about how the internet may eventually be on Mars. You know, we'll be having that.
Well, the internet on Mars is easy. I think any idiot can do that if you send out satellites around Mars. But to create a colony on Mars would be much harder. And you would need rapid fire of rockets every 60 seconds, hundreds of them with robots, to create a cupola where we could live, and moving atmosphere and water and provisions there. So it's number one, as a colony for survival, it's not really doable. It's in a way an end of a utopia. And it shouldn't be a utopia at all, because utopia should be here on our planet. We should not care about the habitability of a foreign planet. We should rather look at improving what is happening here.
Yes.
And it's, when you say Musk or Kleinrock, it's casting. You see, there was on the other end at Stanford, there were also scientists, much more boring than Kleinrock. And Kleinrock, I filmed him at least 2 or 3 times. And he said, well, this is military hardened, and just touched it like this. I stopped it and I said, no, it doesn't look hardened. Show me how hardened it is. And he banged at it. I said, we do it again and you bang at it. So, of course, some of it is emphasized or staged and cast like in a feature film.
Of course. And I mean, that's clearly that's what's made so many of your films very distinctive. But are the people in, I mean, they're obviously in on this. You say to him, hit the side of it, and he says, great, because it was a sort of only a slight exaggeration of what he was going to do before. But do you ever get people going, I'm not going to do that?
Not really, because I do get things across, and I would not ask you to do things on camera that are not within your nature, that you wouldn't enjoy to do. So you have to read. You have to read the personality. You have to know the heart of men when you are a director. And of course, that's what I do in my profession. Otherwise, I shouldn't make films.
And I mean, the heart of men and the ambitions of men have been so much the feature of your films. I mean, going way back, and we're going to show a clip from Agira in a moment, where you cannot get a greater representation of the power of will, really, there. But people do mistakenly often refer to Agira as being sort of like your first film. It's your first internationally recognized film, but you'd been making films for quite a while before.
Yeah, well, I think I was 28 or so when I made the film, fairly young, but it was my 11th film, I think, something like that. So people always think, or they come to me and they say, I saw your first film. And I say, which one? Aguirre, no, it's not really my first film. I made things before, and very good ones.
I think one of the things that remains, and I've seen it several times, the film is that you actually do every single time you feel you are in that place with those people. And that I know that you took the basic facts of the story and of it created a kind of meditation on it. But it feels everything to do with the circumstances of it feels so real.
Yeah, of course, what you see has a very strong sense of authenticity. We lived on rafts like this. The rafts actually followed us 2 bends of the river behind, and we would stay overnight on the rafts, and people were rotting and rusting. Their cuirasses started to rust, their swords started to rust, and I wanted to have a scene where Kinski or Aguirre yells at the horse and the horse drops. And we had a lot of things, we tested a lot of things, and finally just did it as it was. The horse actually, it was slippery on the raft, and it fell. And we had sedated it in a way. We knew it was going to come down in a few seconds, and we timed it. But I had done tests because I wanted to start the film at an altitude of over 4,000 meters, 4,500 meters, with hundreds of Spaniards and native Indian slaves coming down on a glacier, and hundreds of pigs. And the pigs were supposed to be somehow swaying and suffering from altitude sickness and drop over, and we tested certain medications with veterinarians that would make them unconscious, but it just didn't function. It was, and by the way, I tested. I was up on a glacier at that altitude. We were 6 people, and 4 of my guys were altitude sick and had to be somehow transported down. So what I keep doing is the doable. Do the doable. No 400 pigs all somehow swaying and staggering in altitude sickness. It just does not function. It does not work. And I keep telling to my collaborators, in particular cinematographers, who say, we could dig a hole in the ground and have the camera so low and we are looking up at the person. I would say, yes, but just calculate how much it would take to dig the hole. But we have 5 more scenes today. We have 16 days for shooting this film. So let's do the doable. And that's what I do here.
Well, but that doable would be undoable for most people, actually. That's the point. It's doable for you. And there's still that idea that, and okay, the staggering pigs may not have worked, but you have monkeys all over the place, you know.
Yeah, it was over 400. Yeah. And yes, doable. In fact, it was only the cinematographer Thomas Mauch on the raft and me with a sound. And of course, 400 monkeys, and they were kind of afraid, and they would accumulate under a cannon. About 150 of them would pile up under the cannon, and I saw the camera approaching, and I stirred them up quickly, jumped aside, and the camera was panning there. And I was bitten at least 30 times during this shooting, and the cinematographer, Thomas Mauch, he had a monkey on his... He had his camera on that side. On the other side, a monkey was hanging onto his neck and bit him in the ear. So it was wild, and he couldn't scream, and he kept on filming. And we could shoot it only once. That was done once, and that was that. And it's one of the finest things I ever did. in my life.
It's the most extraordinary sequence, because just at the point you think there can't be more monkeys, there are.
Yeah, but of course it was doable, or a ship over a mountain. Many people in the crew, practically everyone, tried to dissuade me from my own madness, quote unquote, when we couldn't move the ship. And I knew technically I knew how to do it. And we had to create a certain environment which would allow us to go ahead as we were planning. So you have to develop a sense of the doable, even the impossible, seemingly impossible, like moving a steamboat over a mountain. That's a hard one.
And all those, I mean, obviously, so many of your films from that period, Fitzcarraldo in particular, are surrounded by great stories of the struggles between you and Klaus Kinski, and the idea that there was as much drama as it was behind the camera as there was in front of it.
Yeah, but
looking back,
it's only a very distant echo, and it doesn't really count. It's a kind of stuff for little anecdotes here and there, but what counts is what you see on the screen, and what counts is that Kinski is phenomenally good, and everybody, not only Kinski, was a pestilence in screaming and destroying a set and throwing tantrums, and so it was also not only Kinski was a problem, the other actors and the technical crew became the problem, because they said, how can you do this again to us? Kinski again, this pestilence, and and they're threatening to leave the set and go, because Kinski was unbearable. So it's just something you have to cope with.
And that extraordinary kind of the energy, the drive, the will that is Aguirre or is Fitzcarraldo. I mean, that in a sense is one of the things that really fascinates you, doesn't it? In whatever form of activity you come across it. And as far as the subjects for your documentary, I mean, we're moving towards talking about Dieter Dengler now. It's that idea of how people can survive these extraordinary ordeals. And how they do it, is that also what interests you?
I think Dieter Dengler, the protagonist in Little Dieter Needs to Fly, and also in a transformed shape in the feature film Rescue Dawn, where Christian Bale played his part. I think Dieter Dengler came into this survival well prepared, because as a child he grew up in that, took us very close, brought us very close to each other. He grew up without the presence of a father. He grew up hungry, like I grew up, and he in the Black Forest, I in the Bavarian mountains. So there were many things similar. However, Dieter Dengler, in Dieter Dengler's childhood, it was much more severe. I remember I was hungry for maybe 2.5 years, but in his childhood it was so bad that his mother would take his younger brother to bombed out buildings, and they would rip down the wallpaper, and the mother would cook the wallpaper because there were nutrients in the glue. So he was down that far. And so he had a sense of survival, a sense of danger, a sense of responsibility also. So Dieter Dengler, it's in no one's nature to be so courageous as he was, but he in a way grew into it.
Because it is an extraordinary story, because he comes from Germany to the United States, where he then enters the forces and becomes a pilot in Vietnam. I mean, and he's almost like a sort of poster boy pilot, isn't he? He's very good looking and, sort of positive and brave, and then is shot down in over Laos in 1966.
In the first 40 minutes he was shot down. In fact, he never wanted to go to war. He only made it to the United States because he had this dream of flying. And it's almost like in an ancient Greek tragedy, a young man, and has his dream. and he fulfills the dream to fly, and is being punished for it, and almost perishes in a jungle prison, and when he escapes, is being saved when he's down to 85 pounds, had maybe one day to live. So he was very lucky, and some sort of redemption. It's almost like an ancient Greek drama, and so in a way he's a real cinema character and a cinema figure, and has seen things that nobody of us have ever imagined could be possible.
And in the most extraordinary way, iterates his story. I mean, in such a vivid and sort of performance kind of way for the camera, tells the story, but you take him back to the places themselves where he recalls the things that happened to him. There
was no mercy. I told him, no. Dieter, we have to go back to the jungle. And actually we couldn't go into Laos. We were not allowed to film, but we filmed on the other side of the Mekong River in Thailand. You see Laos on the other side, and we had a plan to locate actually his plane wreck. There was still an engine and some pieces of the fuselage which were very pinpointed, clear at this place, and we planned to swim across the Mekong at night and take a small camera with us and go into Laos and film. There were some more prudent members in the crew who dissuaded us from doing it, and I didn't do it because I thought to myself, would it bring much to have some footage of some of the fuselage in the jungle being overgrown by vines? No, it wouldn't have so much value. It would be much more valuable to have Dieter recounting what he went through, and in our imagination take us through the ordeal.
Little Dieter Needs to Fly is the most extraordinary documented. Absolutely. I mean, the pictures are there in your head, and yet you wanted to make a feature film. Why was it? I mean, clearly, Christian Bale is fantastic. The performance is amazing, and you do have, again, that real sense of being in the jungle. But why did you feel that it needed that feature treatment?
No, it was only a feature film. There was only a plan to make a feature film. And it was clearly planned. Christian Bale was ready to do it, but we couldn't finance the film for years. And the situation emerged that all of a sudden a German TV channel was interested in the story. And I said to Dieter, we can do a documentary. Shall we do it? And in a way, the feature film that hadn't been created informed the documentary. So it was a very strange crossover from the future into Little Dieter Needs to Fly. By the way, and that's what I have to tell every young person who is starting to make films, you will have your defeats and you will have your problems with the networks or with the producers. Actually, the chief network executive who had somehow been the one who promoted the film and got the finances, he saw the film after it was finished in the editing room. He flew to Los Angeles, sees it, and he crouches down and he becomes silent and watches the film. And at the end of the film, he looks at the editor and me and he says, can you show me quickly where's a toilet, a restroom? And we said, yeah, out there and then to the left. And he says, before he leaves, he says, this film is so bad. I've never seen anything so bad in my life. I need to vomit now. And he walks out, comes back after a while, and he says, this film is so unspeakably bad that I cannot, and it was meant for prime time. It was part of a series. It was meant for prime time, 8:30 in the evening. And he buried it at 12:15 after midnight, when only 2% were left in front of TV screens and 90% of them sleeping anyway. So the film was hidden and buried. And it's one of my best So, and these things happen, and you have to brace yourself for the bozos.
I mean, since you mentioned young filmmakers, you're not a great fan of film schools.
No, although I run my own film school, the Rogue Film School, but it's some sort of against what you normally see worldwide in film schools. Very disappointing, very dull what's going on there. So it's more the real guerrilla style sort of stuff, and very intense. And the film school doesn't have a place, nor does it have a specific time. I could hold my film school, for example, in Hyde Park over a long weekend, 3-4 days, or in an abandoned quarry in Yorkshire somewhere. I could do it, and I would determine once I know 5-6 months ahead of time, I'm not under contract, I'm not filming at that moment, let's say beginning of March next year, I'm certainly going to be free. I could hold one of those sessions of the Rogue Film School. And of course, it's not for the faint-hearted. And since I have announced I would, the only thing I really teach is how to pick locks and how to forge documents, forge shooting permit, for example, for which I used when I did Fitzcarraldo. I couldn't have made the film without massive forgery because I was not allowed to move my ship up a river. There were military camps springing up one after the other, and nobody knew what was happening. So I brought a massively forged, beautiful shooting permit. What we did not know was that a border war would break out soon between Peru and Ecuador. And I had built a camp, and it was for over 1,000 people, and it was attacked and burned to the ground. So I had to start all over again somewhere else, 2,000 kilometers further to the south of
But that was doable.
of Peru.
That was doable.
It had to be done, yes, and it was doable. But of course, you have to face other problems, and there was some of them were serious. We had 2 plane crashes, or we had I lost my leading actor out of the film, Jason Robards, and his sidekick Mick Jagger. He's the singer from the Rolling Stones. Yeah, you know him, I'm sure. And on and on and on. So there were real problems there, catastrophes of great consequence, of course. So they had shot half the film, and I'd start to begin all over again from the beginning.
The next clip we're going to show is from a project where much of the footage is actually found footage. It's from Grizzly Man, and the subject, Timothy Treadwell, the environmentalist and activist, he was already dead. I mean, you never met him, did you?
No, I didn't. He was already 10 months dead. However, I do have an ongoing argument with him, and I thought it was all right because I differ with him in, for example, his understanding of nature or wild nature. I don't know which clip you're.
Well, we're going to. We're absolutely going to show a clip which partly discusses that. He's a very complicated character, Timothy Treadwell. I think that's a slight understatement, but he's a very complicated character because on the one hand, he spent 13 summers, I think, wasn't it, with these bears in Alaska. Extraordinary video footage of them. Clearly, a degree of courage, but would also report on it as if he was in a reality television show with a kind of curious...
Or maybe even worse, in a Disney movie.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's right.
Yeah, as if bears were fluffy creatures you could approach. He actually does it in the film. He reaches, you see his hand reaching out and touching the face of a bear, and he would sing a song to the bear. You just don't do it. You better You see, I differ with him. I do not love the bears. I would rather respect the bears. So of course I had quite difference in opinion, and I voice it. And I think it's kind of legitimate that I do this, because it's not only Timothy Treadwell. There's some sort of a trend in highly technical civilization which does not understand wild nature anymore. And it's what I call the Disneyization of wild nature. And unfortunately, this philosophical sort of deep misunderstanding cost him his life, and also cost the life of his girlfriend, Amy Huguenard, who was with him at the time. And when park rangers were called in, 2 bears had to be shot dead because they started to attack the park rangers as well, and they had to be shot dead. So it was counterproductive what he did, in a way. And so it's one of those projects where it's not that I started to develop it or so. It just in a way jumped at me, and I usurped a project that basically somebody else was ready to do. Because I just took it away.
It had so many, because there's obviously, I mean, one of the things that everybody picked up on was the fact that there was an audio recording, of the moment of death of Treadwell and his companion, and so there's a sort of sensationalism that surrounds it as well, and in a sense, what I feel that you're doing, and well, you can tell me whether you are or not, was that you were sort of trying to strip away that, but also trying to redress the kind of sentimentalization that surrounds all of it at the same time.
Sure, the sentimentalization, I'm kind of allergic against that, but you are referring to a tape. What happened is, when the bear attacked, it was in both Amy Huguenard and Treadwell, with all probability, were in the tent. Treadwell apparently left the tent in order to confront the bear, and his girlfriend switched on the camera. It must have been so violent that she didn't have time to take the lens cap off the lens and dropped the camera. So the tape ran, but it only recorded the audio. And everybody who was into this production, the TV network and the distributor and the producer, they said to me, you have to address this tape because it was discussed in all the media. Everybody wanted to know what's on the tape. And I said, okay, I'm going to address it, but I will not play it for an audience unless I know what's on it. And this is why I staged, you see me from behind, and I'm listening to the tape, and opposite to me is this young woman, Jewel Palovac, who lived with him once and who is the owner of the tape now. She inherited the tape. And she tries to read from my face what I'm hearing. You see her face, not mine. And she starts to cry. She sees there's something going on inside of me. And I took it off and I said, this is not going to happen. This is not going to be in my film. And I was under pressure and I said, no, I'll walk out of this project. It's not going to be in this film, only over my dead body. So it's not in the film. They had to respect it.
And you describe, at one point, you described the story as being beautiful. And I'm interested to know, because I don't find Treadwell's life, I understand the endeavour of trying to get close to the animals, but I find the whole thing, sort of his personality and the whole question of his attitude, so problematic. Obviously, the end of it is not beautiful. Does the beauty refer to the affection with which he is still held by so many people, or the kind of the love that you see from his friends and former?
Well, it's the beauty of these animals, and it's the beauty of the landscape, and it's something very coherent out there that he did not really fully understand. And of course, I give him the chance to create his own stardom. He wanted to be a star of his own movie. And he was very selective, for example. He would do something, step in front of the camera and make a grandiose statement. And he would say, oh, no, this was really bad. And the next one is going to be the motherfucker. And he steps in front of the camera again. But we know, for example, that he must have taken one of these things at least 14 times because he erased. We have take number 2, we have take number 11, and we have take number 14. 3 takes that are still visible. So he must have deleted all the rest. Maybe he did a few more takes and deleted them at least 14 times, like an actor in a feature film. And I wanted to give him the chance to be the star of his movie. And he's very coherent sometimes and really grandiose. And at the next moment, he's crumbling and he's defeated and he's melancholic and whatever. So there's a lot of facets in his personality. And I tried to give him the chance to show the entire cross-section of his personality.
Whilst at the same time also inviting us to reflect on the relationship of humanity within the world, which increasingly does seem to be sort of more overtly what your interest is.
Sure, of course. I had my own preferences, and he had something like 100 hours of footage. I personally saw only something like 12, 14 hours all in all, because I had to be very fast with editing. And it was kind of odd. The production said to me, I started shooting on my birthday early in September, and I was back from shooting 3 weeks later, around 25th or 22nd of September. And the production people told me, oh, this looks like a film for Sundance, a festival. Do you think you can finish it until Sundance, which is end of January? I said, yeah, I'm always fast, I can do that. And they said, but there's a glitch. And I asked, what is the glitch? Well, the submissions for Sundance end at the beginning of October in 10 days from now. Can you manage to edit the film in 10 days? I said, yeah, let me try. And I finished it in 9 days. It's not completely correct. After that, we still fiddled. We still didn't have the final music. There was only temp music. And because of this pressure of time, I could not watch 100 hours of footage of Treadwell. And I said to everyone, what I've seen so far, 90% are fluffy bear cubs. And so I don't need these. Look out for example, encounters with foxes, because he was completely off guards with foxes. He was not the magnificent warrior who had to defend a 1,100 pounds grizzly behind him against the bad guys.
Which clearly needed
with foxes, he was much more personal, and he had friendship with foxes that was genuine in a way. And I would have very clear criteria what to search for. And even though there were intelligent young people who sifted through it, I found things thrown away. There's a wonderful moment. He plays Starsky and Hutch. I've never seen it, but it seems to be detectives or so who are wildly out there. And he jumps in front of the camera and plays some moment of Starsky and Hutch, and then he disappears. And for 15 seconds, he's gone. And you see reed grass wafting in the wind. And then he jumps back and appears again. And I only saw how he jumps in front of the camera and how he comes back. And I asked the young man who was sifting through this, I said, isn't there something in between? Yeah, he said, but I deleted it. I left it out. And I said, show me what happens in between, 15 or 20 seconds. And all of a sudden I see something magnificent, an image of such great beauty where an image where a landscape demands to be shown on a screen, some sort of an aesthetic that has its own power that is beyond the person who did the shooting and the person who was editing the film. It had to be in the film. And I reintroduced it into the film, the time in between, which was literally nothing. But it had a great, strange beauty and demanded to be in the film.
And that, of course, is why cinema can allow us those moments to meditate on that. It's one of the few places in life now.
Yeah, meditate. No, I'm not so much into meditation.
Contemplate,
I don't like.
Then.
Yeah, no, I prefer people who are not sitting in lotus position and do meditation and empty themselves out.
No,
I've never heard anything decent from any one of those. I prefer to see you doing some solid thinking and come back with a coherent argument.
So much for the meditation then. Okay.
In Hollywood, by the way, you have yoga classes and meditation classes for the 5-year-old.
Oh.
So you just want to toss a hand grenade when it comes to that.
Sorry, I'd forgotten how charged some words become on the other side of the Atlantic. But
I'm just allergic against certain things.
The last clip we're going to show is from a group of people, very different kind of people in a different environment, which is Antarctica and a group of scientists. And this will sort of also lead towards some of the films you've been working on more recently. And this was Encounters at the End of the World. And you went down there to McMurdo, to this extraordinary place, which is both the very end of the world and also a little community, a little town in itself. I mean, was there any way to prepare for that?
No, because you fly in only once. It's very expensive to bring a person into Antarctica or McMurdo Station, which is the biggest settlement there. But the problem is to maintain one person, to keep you warm, give you a place to sleep, feed you with a warm lunch or so. That's extremely expensive. A single glass of water is very expensive because you have to fly in gasoline and melt glacier water. So a glass of water like this would be $10 costs. And on to maintain one person for one day is something like $10,000. So even the most expensive suite at the Ritz is probably less expensive. So and you cannot come there before and do research. You are thrown into Antarctica, and then you have to come back with a film.
And the people who are working there are contemplating whether they are beneath the ice or whether they are looking over the edge of the volcano, or if they are contemplating the great questions of what will happen to the planet as well.
Also, but not only, I mean, what is happening there, and it's an ideal place to do astronomical research because you have 5 months of darkness, for example, during the Antarctic winter, or you do have certain underwater single-cell creatures that you can retrieve from there. And that was my interest. I wanted to go underwater, under the ice. And it's so strange and so science fiction that I actually based some of this. I based a science fiction film, The Wild Blue Yonder, on footage that was shot under the ice shelf of McMurdo, of the Ross ice shelf. I was more interested in that, but I was not allowed to go underwater. You cannot have an amateur trying to dive there and then an accident happens and retrieving a body or somebody half dead would take so many resources. They wouldn't allow it. And it was correct that they didn't allow it. So I decided I'd like to do more than just underwater filming, which others actually did for me. And I just ventured out. One thing is important about this. We were only a 2-man enterprise, the cinematographer and I did the sound. and directed the film. And we land, and he looks at me with this glaring sunlight on the ice, and you see very far into the distance, 100 kilometers in the distance, there are mountains across the bay of the Ross Bay. And Peter Zeitlinger looks at me and he's completely confused, and he says, Werner, how, for heaven's sake, are we going to explain a whole continent like this to an audience back home? And I said to him, we do it like Virgil in the Georgics, who actually writes, it's a wonderful, one of the, arguably the finest poetry ever written, about the beauty of farm life and the glory of the beehives and pruning of apple trees and so. And Virgil never really explains in practical terms what agriculture meant or living in the countryside meant. He names the glory. And I said, we do it like Virgil. We come here, we film, and we only name the glory of this continent. And every single person who is in front of our camera is royalty. Everyone. And that's an attitude I always have when I have actors. I do not have stars. I do not treat anyone like a star, but everyone who shows up in front of my camera and says only two words as dialogue is treated like royalty. Everyone is royalty, but there's no stars.
So I'm just about, on that note, about to open it out to questions from the audience, but a pessimism about, or a realism about the way the world is, combined with a tremendous faith in humanity at the same time?
Well, when we look at human species, and particularly now with our dependence on the internet, for example, we are much more vulnerable than we used to be before when there was homestead farming. The Amish, for example, have a good chance of coping with severe disaster because it's homestead. They live without electricity and without motor cars and things like that. And it's interesting because in the film that Into the Inferno, which I did with Clive Oppenheimer, we filmed in Ethiopia, and they are excavating or finding fossil remains of early Homo sapiens, 100,000 years back. And we were very lucky because they found dozens and dozens of fragments of a skeleton within 30 minutes or so. And one of the Ethiopian scientists, we asked him, you are looking back 100,000 years in time. Do we have yet another 100,000 years as a species, as Homo sapiens? And he has an interesting argument. He says, with all the mistakes we are doing right now, and with the overpopulation and all the consequences, in about 1,000 years from now, the human race will probably enter a very critical phase. And I think he's right. There's something coming at us, and we better do quick learning from our mistakes. So it's not a question of pessimism. It's obvious that human beings are not as robust as, for example, reptiles. Reptiles have a much better chance of surviving all sorts of cataclysms. Or the cockroach, of course, has a wonderful chance. It even survives nuclear radiation. So they're well off, and we should envy them. Well, that's a moment which you do not learn this in film school or anywhere. He opens the film, there's a prologue, and a chaplain who had to be in the death house, in the death chamber, only 40 minutes later. I thought it was in the afternoon sometime, And he comes on the set and taps his wristwatch and he says, quick, 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 I have to be in the death house in 20 minutes. So I drag him in front of the camera. I apologize that I got him into this mess. And I start filming. And he speaks like a phony TV preacher about how grandiose creation is. And he would see that, how beautiful the world was created by God when he's on his golf cart early in the morning, and he would see a squirrel or a horse or some deer looking at him, and God was merciful and full of redemption. And it would have gone on for the next 10 minutes, like a TV preacher, and I stop him and I ask him, tell me about an encounter with a squirrel. I just had it in me that this would break him open, and he unravels. Why I asked him that, I have no idea. It just you have to be alert. You have to understand the heart of men, in a way. And I never saw him before and never again. I met him for 20 minutes, and every other person in the film, I did not meet more than 1 hour in my entire life, only for filming, and that was that. So. As a consequence, I had only 6 or 8 hours of footage for an almost 2-hour documentary. And my heart sinks when I hear from young filmmakers, oh, I shot 650 hours of film and I'm editing since 2.5 years. You see, it may become a good film, but normally they do not know what they are doing, and they film everything that's coming near their camera. And it's brainless. And I try to tell filmmakers, be specific, do good casting. You should know what you are doing, and then you can be much faster in the market out there, the wilderness out there. When young people leave film school, all of a sudden they are exposed to the real market, meaning they have to be on budget, they have to be on time. And they get lost, and very talented young people lose themselves because they never learned this kind of discipline. And tell me about an encounter with a squirrel. It was just some sort of an inspiration I had at that very moment, completely unprepared. It's the first time that I hear from you that low was also used in connection of talking about Native American people. Completely news to me, because for me it was always biblical. Lo and behold, there was light, and God created the heavens and the earth. So it was this kind of biblical sort. And I didn't come up with lo and behold. It was actually the character Leonard Kleinrock who says, we wanted to type in log in. We typed in L. Did the L arrive? Yep. Did the O arrive? Yep. And when they typed in G, the computer crashed. So the first word ever passing through the internet was low, like lo and behold. That's where the title comes from. It's not my invention. And he refers very clearly to a biblical term. And I had no idea that it was ever used in conjunction with the perishing of Indian nations, native Indian nations in America. But similar things are going on right now, and I'm saying that because my wife, while we are here, she's at the British Museum on the 21st. She opens a big sort of event which is called Last Whispers, an oratorio for composed out of voices of languages that are already extinct, or voices in songs where there is one single last surviving speaker, and a few other languages where there's only a handful of speakers left. So it's a big oratorio in the video, and it's going to open at the British Museum in 10 days from now, or less than 10 days. And I've been fascinating because of her about loss of cultures and languages. We do have 7,000 or so languages still spoken on this planet at this moment. And we are losing them at enormous velocity. It's an incredible vehemence of loss. By the end of this century, 95% of all languages will be extinct and only 5% left. And you have to see, it's not just perishing of, let's say, native Indian people, it's loss of whole cultures. What if we lose the last Spanish-speaking person on this planet? No more Cervantes, no more flamenco, no more Velázquez, no more Goya, no more Spanish poetry. So it's that there is a loss going on that is happening in silence. And the very form of loss when we lose language is silence. So that's what touches me much more. And lo and behold, as you say, has to be seen in connection with the extinction of North American native Indians. News for me, and I have to look into it. Filmmaking, of course, is a permanent struggle with adverse realities out there. And from day one, I knew you had to accept the medium as it was. And it hasn't done anything to me that every single day of shooting I do at least 20, 30 compromises. I do the doable. And it has not diminished the quality of the film. It has actually sometimes the compromises forced me into being more intelligent, of doing solutions that are much more like a shortcut in narration, much more economical in my narration. It has been quite often the compromise has been to the advantage of the film. And if you are a filmmaker, you will experience the same thing. Every single day is a chain of banalities and a chain of compromises. And I have absolutely no problem with that. So nothing has ever hurt me. And I couldn't even name a film where I would say, well, this is painful that I had to make this or that compromise. Has never happened to me. The compromises, yes, but no pain. It was wonderful that I had to do the compromises, and it was in the very nature of my profession. Well, for me, there's no such clear distinction. It's all movies. For me, sometimes they are harder to make, sometimes easier. As a rule of thumb, it's not an easy profession. And I think my films inform each other either way, from the documentaries into the feature films, and the other way around. And when you see a film like Fitzcarraldo, for example, sometimes I feel intrigued to be provocative, and I would tell people this is my best documentary, because moving a ship over a mountain is some realistic sort of feat. You have to do it, and you can see it, how it was done. It has elements that are almost documentary. However, when I pull the ship over the mountain, it's not for the sake of realism. It's for the sake of stylization. It's like it looks, the way you see it in the film, it had to look, and it looks like a fever dream in the jungle, or it had to look like a big operatic event. So realism and stylizations inform each other in a way, and you have to see the clear goals in the clear stylizations. That's a much more important aspect of what I'm doing. your observation about the chapters and the numbered chapters, it goes back into the idea of how the film actually originated. I was asked by a very prestigious, very well-respected big internet company that somehow keeps gigantic flows of data moving and looks for anomalies and spams and intrusions by hackers, NetScout. And they wanted me to do a series of films, 5, 6 or so films, short films, 5-minute films for YouTube. And I had done a similar thing for YouTube before, a few years earlier, for YouTube about texting and driving, which was, I was asked by AT&T, one of the big telephone providers in the United States, and then Verizon, Sprint, T-Mobile jumped on board when I started to make the film, about catastrophic events that happens when somebody is driving a car, looking down at the texting and writes a mail. And the statistics went through the roof. I mean, it was catastrophic. Now it has slowed down. And the film was a phenomenal success on the internet. And I was asked, could I do a series 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 or so for YouTube? And I started out like that. On the first day of shooting, I had the feeling, oh my God, I cannot condense my conversation with Leonard Kleinrock to a 5-minute clip. I can't do that. On second day, I stopped everything after shooting, and it was very significant. One in between was an advertisement agency, Yuppies. A creative director was next to me. I didn't know what to do with him. And I had a wonderful conversation, and they watched it 3 rooms away from me on a screen. And at the end of this almost 1-hour conversation, this yuppie from the ad agency comes in total excitement. He was genuinely excited and comes applauding, and he said, "Werner, I've never seen anyone having such a lively, wonderful and intelligent conversation. What was your favorite soundbite today?" And he meant 3 5-second soundbite. And I was stunned being asked that. And without missing a beat, I said, after the first introduction, the next 14 minutes uncut. And having given this kind of impertinent answer, I knew I was right. I had to step out of the sound bites and putting it together into YouTube clips. And I knew I had to do something much bigger, a longer film, much more depth, much more joy of the characters involved in that, much more joy of my own discoveries, all that in one film. And they understood very quickly that this should be done in a different way. And result, now we have Lo and Behold. And I'm very happy that we have this film. And thank you that I got you into the mess here. And I have to thank the festival in Dogwoof who distributes the film. And I had a new experience connecting to over 60 theaters live in a discourse. So it's beautiful new possibilities thanks to the internet. Thank you very much for coming.